The main event of UFC Paris will feature two top 15 lightweights that have both won 4 of their last 5 fights. However, the momentum is more on one side than it is the other. The momentum side is that of the number 11 ranked Renato
Moicano wants money!
Yes, he's won 4 out of 5, but 3 consecutive victories with finishes over Jalen Turner and Brad Riddell and a decision over Drew Dober. A very tough strength of schedule over the last couple of years for Moicano, and he is entering his prime, even though it's a little later than what some others may do. He is 35 years old, but 16 fights in 10 years in the making is this opportunity here for Moicano to get this victory in enemy territory in Paris and approach one step closer to not just a top 10 opponent, but potentially a top 5 opponent. But in order to do that, he will have to beat the Frenchman Benoit Saint Denis, the number 12 ranked lightweight in the world and the minus 285 betting favorite, who again has won 4 of his last 5, but the momentum not quite the same as Moicano because he enters this main event spot, the first of his UFC career, coming off of a loss, and a knockout loss at that, against Dustin Poirier back at UFC 299 in March. Moicano has more than doubled Benoit Saint Denis in UFC experience and will enter this fight just his second UFC main event opportunity, and the first came back in 2019 where he got finished just 58 seconds into the bout against the Korean Zombie. But there's something to be said about Moicano's 10-year career now in the UFC, because if you want to really dig in to his resume and especially into the losses, let's go back to the very beginning, because he started in the UFC 3-0. Then his first loss came to Bryan Ortega, who went on to challenge for the featherweight championship 2 separate times. He then fought Jose Aldo, the longtime king of the featherweight division and a bantamweight title challenger. Loses the Korean Zombie, as previously mentioned. Loses to Rafael Fiziev, a top 15 hot prospect in the lightweight division, and Rafael dos Anjos in March of 2022. But let us not forget how that fight came to a stance. That was a short notice fight where Moicano had to fly all the way across the country, less than 4 weeks removed from his most recent fight when he beat Alexander Hernandez. Came into that fight on short notice and went 25 minutes, not just 15, 25 minutes against former lightweight champion RDA. Moicano really has put it all together here, and you could argue he's hitting his prime. And yes, it's a little bit later than some others do. He's 35 years old, but still time to potentially make a championship run. But he will have to get through Benoit Saint Denis to do so, and that's not been easy to do. I think now, in hindsight, right, it's easy to say that Benoit took that fight against Dustin Poirier, and it was just much too soon. It was a fight that he probably shouldn't have gotten. It was a jump that I don't want to say wasn't deserved, but he should have fought someone else prior to jumping into not only against a top 5 opponent, but someone who's been an interim champion and has fought the who's who of 2 different weight classes in the UFC. But for what it's worth, he did find a lot of success in the first round against Dustin Poirier before seemingly getting gassed out in that second round and succumbing to the incredible boxing of Poirier. But prior to that, he had won numerous fights in a row, and all of them were via stoppage, including victories over Matt Frevola and Thiago Moises. And when he debuted in the promotion, that was on short notice against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos back in October of 2021. And not only was it short notice, it was up a weight class at 170 pounds, and a fight that actually went the full 15. I think now for BSD, 6 months removed from that knockout loss to Dustin Poirier, it is time for him to right the ship and continue that momentum that he was on prior to that loss, which was 5 straight stoppage victories. And he's getting this spot in Paris, right? The guy is from Paris, France. A lot of pressure here is going to be on the shoulders of BSD. Really, if you think about it, back-to-back fights where he has found himself in a very volatile, high-pressure situation. Can he make right against those circumstances in this second opportunity here? His first UFC main event against someone as seasoned as Renato Moicano. If he can, it is a massive victory and a massive comeback for Benoit Saint Denis. And from fight styles and an X's and O's perspective, there's no way that this fight will be boring. Renato Moicano, name a boring fight that man has been in. Finished 11 of his 19 victories, been finished in 4 of his 5 losses, and BSD has a 100% 100% finish rate with 9 submissions and 4 knockouts, and of his 2 losses, been finished once, obviously, against Dustin Poirier. The biggest thing for me in this main event is the competition of Renato Moicano, right? Look at the who's who of 2 different weight classes that he has fought, whereas BSD is still newer to the UFC, and yes, fought 3 very good opponents in a row, Poirier, Frevola, and Thiago Moises, but outside of that, the resume just does not quite stack up. Being that Moicano has been there and done that, been in high-pressure situations, fought the best of the best for 10 years now, I just think that is still a tall task for Benoit Saint Denis, but the dangerous finishing capability could prove to be all BSD needs to get the victory here and right the wrongs from his last loss. And if Moicano wins, that would be a 3-0 year in 2024, and he would look to enter 2025 with a ton of momentum and looking to challenge a top 5 opponent next, and we could only imagine how good that post-fight interview would be as well. Give me your predictions for this main event in the comments below. I think it's going to be a very, very good fight, very entertaining, very competitive back and forth action. I do see a finish coming, but I could see it coming from either guy here. You have the experience factor for Renato Moicano, you have the age being 7 years younger in Benoit Saint Denis, and a just more dangerous guy from a finishing prowess perspective. You put those 2 recipes together, I think we're in for a treat. I think the French crowd is in for a treat. Give me your predictions. Who will take the next step forward into the top 10 of the lightweight division? Will it be Moicano improving his win streak to 4, or will it be Benoit Saint Denis getting the victory in home territory and proving the doubters wrong after that huge step-up loss to Dustin Poirier earlier this year? And from the main event, we will transition into the middleweight co-main event, and you could argue this probably should have been the real main event for UFC Paris, but I'm not going to complain about this nasty doubleheader. This one here, the 4-ranked middleweight Nassourdine Imavov will look to extend his win streak to 3 over the surging number 8 ranked Brendan Allen. 29-year-old Imavov, 28-year-old Ailin. Something's got to give, and a win streak must be stopped. For the Frenchman Nassourdine Imavov, he will enter here in home territory looking to extend his win streak to 3, having just finished Jared Cannonier back in June in Louisville, Kentucky. Say what you will about the stoppage in that fight. I do lean toward the side of it being a little bit early, but it was an incredible fight and an incredible win and performance for Imavov, who was probably going to finish out that fight with a victory regardless, but I get it. It's MMA. It was Jared Cannonier. Anything could have happened. I understand. And prior to that, he had a decision victory over a top 10 middleweight Roman Dolidze. So back-to-back victories over top 10 opponents and a former title challenger in Cannonier. And now Imavov will look to end the win streak of Brendan Allen, a fighter that has not lost in almost 3 years. December 4th, 2021. That is a very important date for the career of Brendan Allen because, well, that was the last time we've seen him lose a fight in the UFC. That was a knockout loss to Chris Curtis in the 2nd round, and since then, he has tallied off 7 straight victories. 5 of them are via finish. The most recent outing from Allen was a split decision in a rematch against Chris Curtis, so he avenged that loss from 3 years ago, and before that, a finish over Paul Craig and Bruno Silva and Andre Muniz, all 2023 submissions. I think it's safe to say that Brendan Allen and Nassourdine Imavov are both 2 of the most underrated fighters in probably the entire UFC, especially in this middleweight division, even though they are both top 10 ranked opponents. They just haven't seemed to take that next step into the casual audience's eye, but this could be that opportunity on a premium stage in Paris in a co-main event spot. Again, I think you could argue this should have been the main event of this card. Imavov is pretty much 1 victory away from true title contention, especially if he can get a big finish over Brendan Allen. But you could argue the same for Allen here. If he beats Nassourdine Imavov, if he finishes Nassourdine Imavov, he will launch himself into the top 5 and make it an 8-fight win streak. At that point, you become undeniable. The submission ace Brendan Allen has finished 19 of his 24 victories, been finished in 3 of his 5, and I'll say he has really started to polish up his striking as well, and I do think he will have to pitch a near-perfect fight in order to beat Imavov, someone that does not make a lot of mistakes. Imavov finished 10 of his 14 victories, only been finished once out of his 4 losses here, and while the momentum in terms of the win streak may be more impressive for the side of Ailin, I think it's the notoriety of the victories for Imavov that pushes that resume forward. Cannonier, Dolidze. His most recent loss back in January of 2023 was to former champion Sean Strickland, right? You can just see that the names here, even if you go further down, Joaquin Buckley, Edmund Shabazi, and Ian Heinisch, the names of the victories for the UFC career of Imavov are just a little bit more impressive than Brendan Ailin, but it's that win streak, the way in which Brendan is getting these victories. Let us not forget that he did even fight Sean Strickland way back in 2020. I believe that was kind of a short notice, up a weight class, light heavyweight type deal. He even got finished in that fight, but still, right? You could maybe, if you dig a little deeper into Ailin's career, argue that he has just as equal of a stretch and of a resume in terms of names that Imavov does. I honestly wish that this fight was a 5-round co-main event. I think it is deserving to be that. I think you could argue that it's a borderline number 1 contender fight. I know that the middleweight division has really been churning in 2024. We're coming off of a Dricus du Plessis title defense and finish of Israel Adesanya. It seems as though Sean Strickland is going to be next for that title fight. We have Robert Whittaker taking on Khamzat Chimaev in October. Now we have Imavov and Ailin here. Caio Barrios coming off of a awesome victory over Jared Cannonier. There's a lot of movement happening in the 185-pound division as we enter this last quarter of 2024. Dare I say that if the winner here gets a big finish or a relatively clean decision, they could maybe turn it around one more time to finish off the year in December and truly give themselves a number 1 contender fight if that's what the UFC feels is necessary. I'm very curious on what you all think about this fight. Do you think it should have been the main event? And more importantly, what are your predictions? Will Imavov make it 3 straight victories, all against ranked opponents? Will Brendan Ailin get the biggest win of his career and extend his win streak to 8? Now that we are done with the storylines and what is at stake in the co-main event and main event, let's give some shine to some of the other notable fights in this 14-fight card. Obviously, it's filled with a lot of French talent, but there's also some big names to keep in mind as you watch this card. We have a featherweight featured bout that is surely sliding under the radar this week between William Gomis, who is 3-0 in the UFC, and Joanderson Brito. For Gomis, he is from Paris, France, and he has fought on both Paris, France cards. September of 2022, his UFC debut, and September of last year, his most recent fight. So over a year hiatus for Gomis as he will look to go 4-0 in the UFC. To do so, he will have to beat Joanderson Brito, who has not lost since January of 2022. Brito has won 5 straight fights. All 5 of them are via stoppage. The biggest against Jack Shore back in May of 2024. A very big win for Brito, who is 29 years old, 17-3 with 1 draw. This is a banger of a fight where I think the winner will get a ranked opponent next. This is a huge fight for 145 pounds in the future of the division. Next up in the welterweight division will be the 2021 Ultimate Fighter winner Bryan Battle, looking to make it 5-1 in the UFC. You may even argue that he should be making it 6-1 because back in March of 2024, he had a no contest due to an eye poke in the second round against Angelosa. But before that eye poke occurred, Bryan Battle was having a nearly flawless shutout performance where he was probably going to end up not only winning that fight, but getting a finish. Outside of that loss, just look at the finishes that he has. He has 2 fights that have been less than 45 seconds with his finishes, convincing dominant decisions, convincing finishes that have happened in the second round even. I mean, Bryan Battle is a very, very underrated fighter. But should he win here, you could argue he should be getting a ranked opponent next in this division. But we should not ignore the fact that his opponent, Kevin Jousset, is very dangerous in his own right. 10-2 overall, 5 of those 10 victories are by finish, 31 years old, 2-0 in the UFC. This is a very big fight. And again, I just feel like maybe this whole entire card's going under the radar, but there are some sneaky good fights from top to bottom. Morgan Charriere will look to make it 2-1 in the UFC and bounce back from his loss back in April, which was a very close split decision to Chepe Mariscal. The Cage Warriors alum had a lot of momentum when he entered the UFC last September, and he made good on it with a 3-minute and 51-second knockout in the first round of his fight. He's a Cage Warriors longtime veteran. He has 19 victories, 10 defeats, which isn't the prettiest of records, but nevertheless, his hype was very, very notable. Only 28 years old for the featherweight out of Paris, France. But he is taking on a very dangerous Gabriel Miranda, who is 17-6 overall and has a 100% finish rate, 1-1 in the UFC, lost to the main eventer Benoit Saint Denis. I think this is going to be a very fan-friendly fight. Faris Ziam will look to make it 4 straight victories in a row in the lightweight division. To do so, he will have to defeat the steamroller Matt Frevola. There's a fighter that I'm very excited to see on the prelims of this card, and that is the undefeated Frenchman Oumar, 10-0, 8 finishes, 28 years old. This is exactly what the light heavyweight division needs. He made his debut back in May of 2024 and finished the fight 3 minutes and 43 seconds in with a submission. He is taking on Jung, who at one point was 4-0 with 1 draw in the UFC, but since then has lost 3 straight fights, 2 of them via finish. Now, albeit the competition very good in this losing streak, Carlos Alberg, Devin Clark, and Dustin Jacoby has victories over notable names as well, but this is an uphill battle for him as he takes on the Frenchman, C. Ludovit Klein hasn't lost a fight in nearly 3 years. He will look to extend his win streak by beating Roosevelt Roberts. Ailin Perez hasn't looked back since her UFC debut back in September of 2022. She will look to make it 4 straight victories and improve upon her number 15 ranking in the bantamweight division. To do so, she will have to take on Darya Zheleznyakova. Darya made her debut back in March of 2024. She is 1-0 in the UFC and 9-1 overall with 5 finishes for the 28-year-old. Jacqueline Cavalcanti is making a relatively quick turnaround, coming off of a victory in August of 2024, but she is 2-0 overall in the UFC, 7-1 in total, 27 years old, looks to be a very, very promising fighter in the women's bantamweight division, and she will take on the 8-1 Nora Cornolle. She is 2-0 in the UFC thus far, 34 years old, but finished 7 of her 8 victories and hails from France. Will have the home crowd behind her early on in the night. We have Contender Series alum Bolaji Oki, who is 9-1, kicking off the card against Chris Duncan, another Contender Series alum. This is a banger of a fight in the lightweight division to kick off the card. Bolaji has finished 6 of his 9 victories, and Chris Duncan has been in some absolute wars, finished 8 of his 11. He's 2-1 in the UFC. So be sure to give me your thoughts and give me your predictions for UFC Paris in the comments below, especially those top 2 fights. Those are some big time bouts in the lightweight and middleweight divisions with potential title shots on the line and top 5 opponents coming up next for those winners. If you enjoyed this preview, please be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Every single week, I will break down not just the X's and O's of the fights, but the biggest storylines and what is at stake for each of those fights and fighters as well. I also recap the most meaningful results from every card and give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA and follow along on your favorite audio platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes release every Monday and Friday. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you in the next video.